Passing our genes along to the next generation is one of our driving forces. It is one of our very lizard brain activities. And as we have accumulated more stuff as a species, we have gotten the desire to pass our stuff along to the next generation. But passing your wealth along generation to generation is a societal thing. It's not something that automatically happens because you're a successful breeder. Therefore, we've come up with all kinds of models to determine who inherits what and why. And that is the subject of today's video. I would like to talk about inheritance models and the impact that they have on fantasy societies. My name is Marie Mullaney, and this is another episode of Just in Time Worlds. If you like this kind of world-building content, please do hit the subscribe button down below. I also do have a Discord server where you are welcome to join in the conversation about my videos, my upcoming book, and all kinds of world-building content in general. Link to that in the description of the video. Okay, let's get cracking. I learned a lot about inheritance models and marriage in the process of researching this video. So most of this video is going to be me sharing that information with you rather than discussing fantasy, as is my normal approach to this. And the reason for that is because fantasy in general follows the very single model that we are familiar with in the West, which is to say the patrilineal inheritance of the first son, sometimes the first child inheriting. But over the course of our history as a species, there have been many models, and exploring some of those would provide all of us with some great world-building inspiration. The most interesting anthropological work I found on this topic was that of Dr. Laura Fortunata and her work on the development of models of marriage and inheritance. There is a link to one of her papers in the description if you're interested in the actual scholarly article. Before we plunge into the meat of it, first let's define what marriage is for the purpose of this conversation. I am only looking at marriage with a very narrow lens, that is, as a means to engender children and pass wealth from one generation to another. In that vein, there are 4 models of marriage, and they're defined around the number of male and female partners, or husbands and wives. Monogamy is when a marriage may legally have only one husband and one wife. Polygyny is when a marriage may legally have one husband with multiple wives. Polyandry is when a marriage may legally have multiple husbands and one wife. And polygynandry is when a marriage may have multiple wives and multiple husbands. Polygamy is actually the collective term for non-monogamous marriage models, which I didn't know. So if you didn't know that either, there is your little factoid for today. Remember when I said passing on the genes is a lizard brain activity? It's actually important to consider that. From a woman's perspective, it doesn't matter if she has one sexual partner or many partners. She can only get pregnant one kid at a time. But for a man, the more times he mates, the higher his chance of passing on his genes. So from a purely evolutionary perspective, a man pushing for multiple partners makes complete sense. However, we can see that marriage and inheritance didn't follow the same push. In Rome, a man had one wife and his heir would result from that marriage or from adoption. But men also had multiple concubines and slave girls, so marriage was monogamous, but mating was polygamous. Why would our societies develop in this way? Before we plunge into Dr. Fortunata's principles that lead to monogamous marriages, I just briefly want to talk about the impact of agriculture on our society. Hunter-gatherer societies are far less concerned with marriage and offspring for 2 reasons. Firstly, land is not valuable per se without agriculture, so inheritance is not as big a deal. Secondly, hunter-gatherer societies have less children than agricultural societies. This is not because less children survive, but because they need less labor. Agriculture requires a lot of work, so once we adopted agriculture as a species, That's when we started delving into marriage and inheritance in new and strange ways. Dr. Fortunata's first principle of monogamous marriages helps explain why this was very directly. This principle is called depletion through division. The essential meaning here is that a piece of land is depleted of value by dividing it. In other words, if you have many children with whom you split the inheritance, the value of the family's wealth is eroded over time. It should be noted that this only applies if the primary source of wealth is a resource that doesn't recover over time. If wealth in your society is measured by heads of cattle rather than acres of land, dividing your wealth is less risky, as the herds of cattle created by the division can recover and once again become a great herd. This is why societies where land is not the scarce resource are more likely to be polygamous than monogamous. But back to land-scarce societies, it's easy to understand why, when wealth is eroded by division, you would have monogamous societies. More, you develop models that ensure that only one child inherits. That child doesn't have to be the firstborn child. It can be picked in a number of different ways. If the firstborn inherits, that's primogeniture. If the lastborn inherits, that's ultigeniture. An interesting approach to picking the child who inherits is which child marries first or which child gets their own children first. This is the whole premise of the Laurel K. Hamilton's Merry Gentry series. In this urban fantasy series, there are two potential heirs to the Fairy Queen of Darkness's throne, and she makes a contest between them. Whoever gets a child first gets the throne. If you do plan on reading those books, please be aware that the author goes off the rails in the later books and they become a porn and angst fest with no plotline to speak of. I think we've pretty comprehensively covered Principle 1. Let's move on to Principle 2, higher paternity for exclusive investment. This principle ties back to wanting to see your genes survive into the next generation. Specifically, this is about men wanting to be sure that their blood, their genes, is what will inherit their wealth. In societies where sexual fidelity on the part of the woman is not heavily enforced, you will often see a model develop where matrilineal rather than patrilineal inheritance is followed. It should be noted here that matrilineal inheritance is not a matriarchy. A matriarchy is when women naturally default as the leaders in a given society. Matrilineal inheritance is when the wealth of a man is passed to the children of his sister rather than the children of his wife. In Kerala in India, this model was followed in the past. The king's sister got the title of queen. His wife was never known as the queen. The men were considered warlords and they did not own the houses. The women owned the houses, and this wealth was passed from mother to daughter. But the man was still the head of the household. In effect, the girls inherited the stuff from their mothers, but their husbands still held patriarchal authority. And of course the next king was the queen's son, so definitely a patriarchal society, but with matrilineal inheritance. If you look at these two principles, the depletion through division and higher paternity for exclusive investment, it's pretty obvious that women and men would start to alter their behavior to higher sexual fidelity and monogamous marriages. You don't want to deplete the wealth too far by allowing polygamous marriages, and from the woman's perspective, she wants her children to inherit, not the children of her sister-in-law. From a fantasy world builder's perspective, the effect of understanding these drives are quite profound. If you want to have polygyny as the model of marriage, you need a society that counts its wealth in something that can recover after division, so definitely not a land-based wealth. If you want to have monogamy as your model, you need land-based wealth, or wealth that doesn't recover after being divided. If you want to have a society where sexual fidelity is not enforced, then you're likely to have matrilineal inheritance. And if you have high sexual fidelity, it is much more likely that you will have patrilineal inheritance. So now we understand why you have matrilineal inheritance, why you have patrilineal inheritance, and when you would have polygamy versus monogamy based on the culture that you're in. When would you have polyandry? So I actually had an interview with an anthropologist around this, which you can check out right over there, my interview with Kathleen from Worlds Unending, where we discussed polyandry. And what she shared with me is a conclusion which makes sense. Polyandry is driven when you are very resource poor. So when your land area is not divisible, so land is scarce and you need land, and the land is difficult to work, so you need men to pool their labor in order to be successful. In that case, you would have polyandry arise. You would have multiple men trying to achieve gene pool success with a single woman because they have to work together. Quite often that kind of polyandry model involves two brothers marrying a single woman. In fantasy, you've got all kinds of other options. In my world, on the Kisangani continent, the priests practice polyandry because they believe that their gods are a threesome, with the woman, the female goddess being the balancer between the two male energies of creation and destruction. And as such, all priestesses and priests, her husbands, are married in a threesome. When you're building these models for fantasy, draw on the culture of our world by all means, but don't forget that you do have the fantastical at your disposition, and you can have a lot more options than just culture. Of course, getting married can have all kinds of rituals as well. So I've recently been reading Raymond Feist's new series, and there he has people getting married in a group ceremony at every Midsummer Festival. So if you want to get married, that's when you get married, at the Midsummer Festival. Jane M. Auld did the same kind of thing in her world, where marriage was a group ceremony that happened at a specific time. In neither of these worlds was sexual fidelity expected in terms of not having sex before the marriage. Marriage didn't somehow make sex holy. It was a declaration of intent to have children together and to rear those children and pass wealth onto them. There are all kinds of crazy wedding traditions that you can use to spice up your fantasy rituals. Hand fasting is a ritual that has been with us from around 7000 BC, where the wedding participants link their hands and they are tied together with a leather thong or a ribbon. In some versions of this ritual, they have to remain tied together for a full day, and at the end of that day, the ribbons, uncut, are made into 2 necklaces that they wear for the duration of their wedding. Stealing of the bride is also quite a common ritual. This might be done in a fake manner where there is no real danger and it's all just part of the ceremony, or it might be a very real test that a potential bridegroom has to succeed in. In the case of a fantasy world, it's also good to consider your magic. In Terre d'Ange, in Jacqueline Carey's world, Dangelines don't get pregnant unless they ask Aseth, the god of healing, to open their womb. So part of the marriage ritual is the women entreating Aseth to make them fertile. In my world, marriage is quite different depending on whether you're a peasant or a noble. Peasant ceremonies are simple hand-fasting rites that are held at the equinox seasonal festivals. Peasant divorce is equally simple. The partner who wants to get divorced simply cuts their ribbon. But if you're a noble, there is an extremely complex negotiation around who will accept the other person's sash. This negotiation hinges around the magical prowess and family connections of both parties, and their wealth in terms of land. During the ceremony, the partner who is taking the sash stands while the partner who is giving the sash cuts their sash off them. Then the taking partner kneels to accept their new sash from the giving partner, and they make their vows to their partner. So you can see that the exchange of power in a wedding is quite dramatic, and the partner who takes the sash is definitely subservient in the relationship. If you think my world sounds interesting, I am looking for ARC readers for my book, The Hidden Blade. If you are interested in receiving an advanced copy and going into a draw to win a physical copy of the book, there is a link to the form to sign up down below. I promise I will not abuse your email. Okay, back to rituals. I mentioned divorce just a moment ago. One of the more interesting divorce rituals comes from Jane M. Aall. In her world, the man maintains the hearth for the couple. If the woman throws the hearth stones out of their living space, then the man knows that she no longer wants to be married to him and he needs to find a new home, because the home belongs to her. Only the hearth belongs to him. I thought that that was a very interesting mechanic. But we did say that marriage is all about children for the purpose of this video. What about children who are born without the benefit of a ceremony? What about bastards? Children born before there is a marriage ceremony, children born in bastardy, presents an interesting challenge. Do those children inherit? Well, historically, it's actually quite a tricky question. Elizabeth I went from being legitimate to being declared a bastard, to back to being legitimate, back to being a bastard, back to being legitimate, quite a few times, because her legitimacy was dependent on whether her father wanted to acknowledge, her father being Henry VIII, whether he wanted to acknowledge his wedding to Anne Boleyn. Bastardy is quite a complex topic and honestly is a cultural one. You can have bastards be part of the inheritance model after the legitimate children, or you can have bastards not be part of the model unless they are acknowledged. Where bastards wouldn't be a problem is if you don't have a land problem. So it's the same as we discussed earlier. If you have a lot of land, or land is not your primary form of wealth, but say cattle is your primary form of wealth, then bastards presents much less of a problem. But if land is your problem, it is far more probable that bastards would be excluded from the inheritance line. That being said, don't forget to look at magic as a resource. In my world, I have magic inherited through bloodlines. My bloodline of the North have come up with a tradition where when a child is 16, when a child of the bloodline is 16, they have a bastard kid. That kid is acknowledged, it carries the name of the family, it's reared within the family, and it's part of the pool of heirs available to the family. But most importantly, it is trained in magic, because this ensures that the magic of the genes survive. It's also important to note that there is a good reason to name your children after your family in these kinds of inheritance-heavy models. And the reason for that is it creates an inherent sense of loyalty. It creates a them versus us. Much like the respect and etiquette of a court engenders that respect for an inherited position, naming children after grandparents engenders a respect for the family in those children, which allows the family unit to be carried forward and the wealth to be built again. And that's why little family rituals are important, and rituals around naming babies are important, and acknowledging babies. Okay, so let's quickly summarize into how you could create a model for inheritance. First up, resources. Remember, the primary driving force here is about inheritance of wealth. What is your resource that people are looking to inherit? What is the resource that they're looking to pass down to the next generation? And in this case, don't forget about magic as a resource. This is a fantasy world. You can have magic bloodlines, you can have magic abilities, all kinds of things that you can drive for. Now remember, your inheritance model is going to be heavily influenced by how splittable and how recoverable your resource is. We have gone for the single child inheriting model because most of our wealth is around land, and land doesn't recover from being split. But if your wealth is in something that will recover from being split, it is much more likely that you will have a setup where you have as many children as possible, rather than having a single child inheriting the bulk of the wealth. Again, this is fantasy. Don't forget about interfering gods and them passing models down from on high like I did in my world. And the last thing to think about is the historical influences of your world. Has there been an event in your history that would create monogamy as an important relationship? Has there been an event that would create polyandry? All of these things have their roots in culture, and culture is built on history. So if you want to have a specific model and you can't think of a societal reason or a resource reason why it exists, draw on your history and make it a historical reason. And that is my take on inheritance and marriage and children and a whole lot of rambling about anthropology. I hope that you have enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments what's the most interesting model you have seen in fantasy worlds. And don't forget to hit the like button. And I will see you soon for another video of Just in Time Worlds.